Warren Buffett, one of his great quotes, never bet against America. He's the biggest holder of U.S. Treasuries. He's not shorting the bond market. He's buying U.S. Treasuries.
Welcome to Retire Smart with David Brooks. I'm Chip Maxwell. David, we'll get to the news as always, but first here, I'm going to invoke a point of personal privilege and just note that June 8th marks my 5th anniversary at Retire Smart.
Woohoo! All right, 5 years, and sadly, I think it was just last month we took away the 6-month sabbatical benefit at the 5-year mark.
No.
Man, sorry about that. But anyway, congratulations. No, that's pretty awesome because when you joined, when we first met,
quite a ride.
Yeah, you were doing a radio show that I started sponsoring, and the signal was just strong enough so if I drove to the parking lot, I could actually hear the show outside your building, right?
Yeah. We've come some distance since then.
Well, and then a few years later, you end up joining our team, and I think you were maybe number 12 or something on the team.
I was the 12th employee. We were in a facility. Well, it was your second stop. Your first home, which, you called it the dungeon. It was a ground level suite, but it was kind of rough in there. You were in your second stop, 1,900 square feet, 12 employees. I was number 12. I made it a dozen, serving about 200 households. David, now we're north of 40 employees, including a dozen licensed financial advisors in addition to yourself. We're at 19,000 square feet now. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we're approaching 1,000 households served.
Yeah, I believe we'll cross that number here this
before
year.
2025
we may have already
is done.
crossed it, frankly. I
Incredible.
don't even know.
What a journey it's been. You probably remember this when it was just you and Alicia, the first employee you hired, working the front desk. You hearken back to the radio days when you were sponsoring a show that I hosted, and you said, so you'd been on board a few months and Christmas was approaching. You said, I've advertised on other stations before, and I know sometimes a radio station likes to thank its advertisers for a little Christmas gift. If by chance you were thinking of that, don't bring us a box of chocolates or a fruit basket. Bring a space heater. Alicia's freezing to death on that front entryway.
It was pretty dismal, yeah.
It was rough.
So the company was started in the basement, in my basement, literally. Then we went and rented that little office. I couldn't operate out of my house, too much distraction. And then, it literally was the dungeon. And, I really need to take some of our employees. We need to take them over there just so they can actually appreciate it. You walk in now, we have a huge kitchen, snacks are provided. It's a pretty nice work environment. At least I believe it is that we provide.
It is indeed,
compared to, you got to see the humble beginnings. So I think that's great.
Yes. Well, and what a ride it's been, and the best is yet to come. All right, here we go into the news. David, you sent me this right before we sat down to do the show. So ADP is an employment analysis firm. It's very
largest payroll provider in America. So their data is pretty robust.
And so people pay attention. Eventually, we'll get the May jobs number, but ADP always issues a kind of a preliminary analysis. Here's the CNBC headline: Private sector hiring rose by just 37,000 in May, the lowest in more than 2 years. That's according to ADP's analysis. You see it the same way?
Yeah, that's pretty dismal numbers.
Yeah.
So we are seeing layoffs mount. So Microsoft recently announced 6,000 highly paid folks getting laid off. These keep piling up. So just this week, we saw Atlanta Fed, which is kind of does a forecasting nowcast on GDP, and all the right-wing media outlets jumped on, 3.3% GDP. That's not where GDP is going to come in, but we are going to have a robust number for the second quarter, and that's just due to tariff shifting, right? Inventories, and that's why we had a really negative number in the first quarter. But the economy as a whole is not very, very healthy. Look, we talk about this all the time. I voted for the guy in office now, but we got some troubling times coming ahead, and people need to wake up to the reality and be prepared for what is about to come our way.
So the March and April jobs numbers were pretty good, pretty robust, right? But you think maybe May we might see
so interest
something
rates
different.
have not faded as most economists thought they would, and what Wall Street was predicting is lower interest rates. We know that we're financing all this debt, which is going to just keep piling on to the government spending and adding to our deficit. I mean, if interest rates stay where they are, we're looking at over a $3 trillion a year deficit now, Chip. So adding $3 trillion a year to the current. And by the way, this weekend we are going to cross $37 trillion in debt. And we're adding over $1 trillion every 90 days right now. So think about that. $1 trillion every 3 months in additional debt. And some people can't even comprehend that. So, Chip, 32 seconds ago, we were in the middle of last month. We were 32 seconds ago would have been before Jesus was put on the cross. All right. And that's how long it would take to pay off $1 trillion. If you pay me $1 a second, it would take you 32,800 years.
You just broke my brain with that one.
So it's unconscionable that our government can't get, behind actually getting our spending back in line. And we know we're going to spend, right? But typically the government spends, and I know this in the story, about 17.5% of our GDP is what our government usually costs. And we can go back for the last 50 years and see that. Well, we're spending in the 22, 23% range right now. That's massive up spending, and it can't continue or you'll bankrupt the country. And that's why interest rates are higher, and that's what's going to slow down the economy, because now capital expenditures, businesses that want to expand. If I want to borrow money to open a new office location, to buy a building, whatever I want to borrow money for, any business owner is going to have to pay more for that loan, which means less money to the bottom line, which means less hiring, less jobs, less raises, and the economic trickle down will just spell doom and gloom in our economy.
Mr. Doge, Elon Musk, on his way out the door said, "What is this bill you're proposing on Capitol Hill?" And for all the successes in the first Trump presidency, fiscal reform was not one of them. And so it has some people concerned.
They campaigned on, we're going to get things back in order.
Yes.
And so now American public, left, right, in the middle, like I said, I'm an independent who voted for this president, but they are not bringing, they're not showing up. They're not doing what we think they said to do. And Congress is the problem. Now, Trump is a bit of a problem. He just wants to get the tax cuts through and claim another victory. I get it. Now, the other thing is this big, beautiful bill is a reconciliation bill. So it's not a provision bill where they actually cut things, but there's no mention of it. And they keep complaining they could have trimmed things. They actually add about $4.8 trillion in the next 10 years to our deficit. So they're not helping. And I think Americans of all political views are just fed up. And we're starting to see that on social media. So I would say take note. And that's the other thing. So everybody cheered just a few weeks in the House passed the bill. The Senate's saying no way, right? So we have at least 4 senators on the Republican side that would be needed to carry this bill over the top, are just not going to move forward. In particular, Rand Paul's an absolute no. Ron Johnson out of Wisconsin is a pretty strong no at this point. So I want them to hold the line. Let's make Congress go back to the drawing board and figure this stuff out.
David, let's go global for a few minutes here. First Europe, then Asia. The headline from CNBC says, Trump-backed nationalist clinches Poland's presidency. You thought this was important enough to bring to our audience. Why?
Well, so Poland has had an amazing economic turnaround, much like Argentina is going through right now. They were a very socialist, communist nation for years.
You've cited Javier Milei several times in Argentina.
Yeah. So Poland has flipped the script into now their GDP per capita is the #1 in Europe. They're skyrocketing up. And they had a recent kind of setback. And so this was a very close election. They kind of had a socialist versus a capitalist, and the capitalist won. It was a thin margin, but he did, in fact, win. And that is just showing you that elections in other countries are swinging back to the right in many cases. We had a couple other ones that we went the other way, like Canada here recently. But, it's just telling you, people are like fed up with the government spending money. And the countries that are pushing, Italy, I think you're going to see some nice trajectory. I forget her name right now. So sorry, the Prime Minister of Italy.
Meloni.
Yeah, and now Poland, Argentina. So you're seeing this around the globe. And what this means is you have to actually do what's called austerity. And we need it here. We have to go in and start to codify, if you want to call it that, some of these things that we found in Doge, and that's just tipping the iceberg. So we need to get in there. We need to get our government under control. The only way you grow the economy is through the free market. You cannot do it with the government. The government spending money is shrinking the economy, and unfortunately, we're headed the wrong direction. And that's Republicans and Democrats alike. They're just addicted to spending, and none of them, Chip, want to cut anything that would hurt their district. And I get it, right? So military bases, if we remember the base cuttings from many, many years ago.
Oh, sure.
Oh, yeah, we're going to cut bases. Just not mine, not in my state, right?
Yeah.
So We need people to put their big boy pants on and come to the table and vote. So I think the big, beautiful bill, the only way I'd continue to call it that is if we put term limits in it.
Oh, okay. Let's spin the globe and stop at an Asian now. Another CNBC headline, China's May factory activity unexpectedly shrinks as tariffs dent sentiment. Worst drop since 2022. Well, that word unexpectedly, I guess only if you haven't been listening to this radio show for the last few weeks, because you have been saying all along, China needs us more than we need China.
Yeah, 2 months ago, they had over 1,800 factories close in 1 month. 1,800 factories employing hundreds of thousands of people. And there was social unrest there, so that's why they flew to Geneva and sort of shook hands with J.D. Vance and our team, if you will, saying they would get the framework. Well, both sides now accuse the other side of not agreeing to the framework that's laid out, so we're back to the drawing board. And so tariffs, and Trump just doubled the tariffs on steel starting June 1st. And made a deal with where Japan's Nippon Steel is going to acquire our U.S. steel here, but that had a guarantee of at least 70,000 U.S. jobs created. So anyway, you're seeing some of the mixes come together. India is pretty close to a deal, but no trade deals have really gotten over the finish line, fully details out. And so I think that's cautionary tale of if China's not producing goods, which, let's face it, that's where we buy toys and cheap textile goods. And I don't really think those jobs are coming back to America, but I think there's certain jobs we need to, reshore here, et cetera. So this is just a cautionary tale that we're a long, long way from home fixing these things, and that could spell doom and gloom for our economy in the near term. But we'll wait and see. And again, the job numbers prove it. So if the Federal Reserve happens to be listening to this show, you got 2.1% inflation this month, and you have dismal job numbers. What are your mandates again? Oh, I'm sorry.
Up next, one of our newer classes is IRMAA, IRMAA. That stands for Income-Related Monthly Adjusted Amount. It's a facet of Medicare that you need to get right to avoid a financial penalty. Financial advisor Jacob Orand joins us next to talk about it. You're listening to Retire Smart with David Brooks. Welcome back to Retire Smart with David Brooks. I'm Chip Maxwell. IRMAA, IRMAA, Income-Related Monthly Adjusted Amount. Getting on the wrong side of IRMAA can result in a nasty Medicare penalty. That's why we offer a complimentary class on the subject, and one of the presenters joins us now. David, please welcome financial advisor Jacob Orand.
Hey, thank you so much, Chip. Yes, joining us once again in the studio, our resident authority on all things Medicare and IRMAA, which is a fun topic to talk about, is none other than our one of our favorite financial advisors to have on the show, Jacob Orand. Jacob, how we doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much.
So I hear it was a split decision on what we were going to talk about this morning. Is that right?
Yeah.
No trivia?
No trivia today. I thought I'd give you a little break.
All right. I'm off the hook.
Yeah. Well, this morning I wanted to talk about Form SSA 44. The name of that form is the Medicare Income Related Monthly Adjustment Amount Life-Changing Event. Man. Whew.
So let's talk about it for a moment. So basically what he's talking about is the penalties that you experience for being successful. You may have stepped into retirement and got quite the shock when you found out just how much your Medicare was, or if you'd already turned your Social Security on, you're thinking, why did my Social Security just get wiped out? What happened to 30% of my check? And unfortunately, nobody tells people, and we do, but not a lot of people warn people. It's a 2-year delay, so we'll get into that. So basically, whatever income amount you make, the government deems that you've made too much, about $103,000 currently for a single person. And if you go over that threshold and you are accessing Medicare, they want to charge you a little penalty. And there's 5 different lines.
5 different levels.
There's B and D, so technically there's up to 10 different little additional taxes that are going to kind of hit you from the side, right?
Even if you're on Medicare Advantage, B, D, Medicare Advantage, you can get hit with these penalties.
And that's where a lot of folks really get caught was the Medicare Advantage, because they're like, I'm on that free plan. Well, I promise you, it is not free.
No.
And they're out-of-pocket exposure to the company, and of course, then the additional taxation. So great news is, if it's a one-time event with proper guidance, you can actually go and kind of argue, if you will, and get it moved away. You can get it removed. And actually, you can do this several times if you're really clever. But basically, so the form you're talking about, SSA 44, sorry. I got a lot to keep in my head, right? So this form is basically if you have a life-changing event.
That's right.
And retiring is a qualifying event.
Absolutely.
You lose a source of income. This is a qualifying event.
That's right. And as you already mentioned, they're going to use, it's not until 2 years after the life of changing event has already happened, because the Social Security Administration is asking the IRS for your tax return from 2 years prior.
Well, now we know why. They have to go into a mountain in Pennsylvania, get on a bicycle and ride 6 months down into an old cave path, light a light up on a torch, and find your
tax
file.
return.
And they're using the Dewey-Dumont system, whatever we call the
Dewey Decimal?
Dewey Decimal system to pull out your file, right? I mean, I picture it if you've ever, going back to old movies I love. I think it was probably on 84, the original Ghostbusters, right? Yep. You see the lady going down there looking for the files, and here comes the Slimer. Ha-ha, IRMAA penalty for you.
That's right. So there are 8 different life-changing events. The first 3 that we're going to talk about today are really happen to a lot of folks. So those are going to be marriage, divorce or an annulment, and death of your spouse. Well, those are the top 3 that they're listed on the form, but they really all belong together.
So if we have a super high income earner, we can just have them get divorced and remarried each year.
One of my favorite tax strategies.
We have performed a wedding in our office.
We have.
So I mean, we're not kidding here. This sometimes does come into the tax planning, right? So, all right. So marriage, divorce, change of income or loss of income, right?
Yep. So death of your spouse, work stoppage, work reduction. So that's a big one. A lot of people don't know that even if they go to take a part-time job afterwards, that's called a work reduction because you've reduced your salary.
Do they have any guidelines on how significant that reduction has to be, or is it just generalized?
So the deduction has to be, you just want to make sure you stay below those Medicare IRMAA lines. We'll talk about that on a later show. We'll actually talk about it on the class, is your modified adjusted gross income.
Okay. So my point is, I actually met with a client recently, and he told me that, I just file a reduction of hours each year. In other words, he's running his own business, and this is the 4th year in a row. And I'm like, well, maybe you're getting away with that, but I think that's kind of skirting the rules a little bit. So, because he's well over the income limit, but every year he just reduces how much work he does. Irony is, this person is an accountant, and that was his strategy. And I'm like, okay. But there are no definitive guidelines like you have to be but if you have a reduction in hours, that's basically what the statute says.
That's right. I would give you a word of advice to that CPA is to never try to mess with the Social Security Administration or the IRS.
Well, the clawback is pretty real, and if they consider, so just to understand, if you make a mistake, IRS penalties, you have to pay what you owe plus interest, plus a 6% exercise tax or penalty.
Right.
But if they consider it fraudulent, in other words, you tried to defraud the government through your strategy, that jumps to 18%. I know this from personal pain. Many, many years ago, many of you heard this story, I was presented a Rolex watch at 19 years of age from the company I work for, the largest pizza chain out there, but it was from the company, not the franchisee I work for. Well, I didn't claim the watch. I was 19, and that was considered fraud in the IRS eyes, so I got whacked for more than the watch was worth many years later. But anyway, so yeah, you're right. Don't mess with the government and the IRS. But there are clear, defined rules that you can, especially if it's a one-time event, right?
Yep.
Unfortunately, we have people lose a spouse. That is going to punch a lot of people over the line, at least that initial year. If we sold a business, if we lost income, we retired, if we decide to go part-time, like you said, if you get married, divorced, or annulled, all those would qualify you. So there are reasonable things that can help. But they've got to know, and so many people don't know anything about this, right?
And they got to fill out the form. They have to contact Social Security Administration. It's a process.
Man, that's a lot to cover. So, and I think it's great because Jacob actually got into this because his parents experienced a life-changing event,
That's right? Yeah. No, my father had a stroke a few years back, and it fast-forwarded the retirement. They didn't think they were going to retire for another 5 to 10 years. And then overnight, just like that, they had to go on Medicare, Social Security, and they ran into these very issues.
Yeah, and it's a very real problem. And you think you're humming along, everything's good. And we always say it on the show, you don't know what you don't know. So we have a class that you have helped literally craft the content where you're going to basically cover how Medicare and the IRMAA penalties collide, right?
Yeah.
And not only that, though, in the class, you teach them how and why, what happens, but you teach them the strategies that we've talked about here, plus some additional strategies we use on our tax planning side, how to prevent future penalties. And I believe the statistic last time I looked, it was 75% of all senior citizens, if they live past age 85, will incur these penalties, right? So it's and I think there was 8.4 million people got what we call the IRMAA letter last November.
Yeah.
And we're scheduled to have over 9.5 million get it this year. So that's a lot of folks.
That is a lot of folks. Yeah.
So when is this class?
Yeah, great question. So that is going to be Wednesday, June 11th, right here in the Midwest Learning Center at Retire Smart. It's going to start at 6:30. I'll be joined by our other certified financial planner, Alex Murray. We are both IRMAA certified planners as part of our designations as well.
Man, you guys do a great job with this class. It was really raving reviews from the last time. So if you want to get signed up for it, go to retiresmartnow.com, click up on the events page, and get registered. The room does fill up. You must register, or you can call the office here locally, 402-369-7777. So what else have we got to find out this week on Medicare? Are there any changes within the new big, beautiful bill that is stumbling and bumbling through Congress that might change some of the outcomes here? Are you aware of anything there?
Yeah, no, there could possibly, right? So we know that the big, beautiful bill is currently in the Senate. There's going to be a lot of negotiations that are happening. We might see where they don't inflate the IRMAA brackets, and they might stay stagnant, which will push even more folks into that bracket. There's a lot on the table right now.
And that has been proposed for many years now in the committees where they want to quickly raise that up. And the other thing is just talk about the inflation of those penalties, right? They go up more than twice CPI, it's twice normal inflation.
That's right. That's right. So not only do you have your Medicare Part B and D premiums go up every single year, but the penalties actually increase year over year, eating more into your Social Security.
And it's not fair. They don't inflate the brackets like they do other brackets. They charge you twice the rate of inflation on the actual premium you pay. And this starts to, I mean, we've done the analysis. It's over $100,000 in additional taxation through retirement for a lot of retirees. So you're going to cover all this and so much more at the class. All right. So if you want to get registered for that class, get in there, get registered. We look forward to seeing you. We're out of time for this segment. Jacob, thanks for stopping in the studio.
Thanks, David.
All right, Chip, what do we have next?
Up next, you have questions. David Brooks has answers. Q&A is next on Retire Smart with David Brooks. Welcome back to Retire Smart with David Brooks. I'm Chip Maxwell. Into the Q&A we go. David, the first question is about when to retire. I've talked to two financial advisors about the likelihood that I can comfortably retire at 59, which is 5 years away. One of them says I should work longer. The other says go ahead and retire at 59. I'm inclined to work with the guy who told me to go for it and retire at 59, but how do I know he's not just telling me what I want to hear?
Well, that's a great question. And the reality is, where's the plan?
Well, that's why we have our whole smart planning process. So let's run it through the system and see.
If you're going to retire at 59, you should know a couple of key factors. 59 and a half is actually a very important date because at 59 and a half, so 59 and 6 months, you are eligible to do what's called an in-service withdrawal. You can access the retirement accounts typically at your workplace. Not all accounts are eligible for this, but about 95% of all retirement plans at work. In other words, your 401k, your 403b, et cetera. And why that's important is there's no 10% penalty. So if these are in tax-deferred accounts you've been saving in, you can get those dollars out to start funding your retirement. But if you take it before 59 and a half, you're also going to pay a 10% penalty to the IRS. So you'd want to make sure that this 59 person is telling you, is it 59 or is it 59 and a half? Number two, what are you going to do for health care? If the person's telling you can retire at 59, do they know what your healthcare situation looks like? Because if you haven't shopped it, just go on the Marketplace website from the government and punch in what a 59-year-old pays. Now, Chip is older than I am. I'm going to gladly point that out. Congratulations on the 5-year anniversary. But you've gone past that number, so we'll just be polite about that, and so we won't say how far. Health insurance isn't cheap at your age, is it?
Oh, my goodness.
No. So we want to factor that in,
I'm going
right?
to say it's at least $20,000 in the marketplace right now. If you're just going to wander out there and try to buy some kind of policy for yourself, I mean, $20,000, isn't that a
I would say that's
figure?
easy. Yeah. I spend more than that. So
you do for our
and I'm
plan,
I'm not that old yet, thankfully. Getting close, but anyway. So there's a lot of factors. So the answer is there a plan that someone can show you where you're going to get your income from, when you're going to take it, how it's going to be taxed, and how long it's going to last? Is that a reasonable assumption? Because if the person telling you to retire at 59 is assuming you're going to get a 12% rate of return forever and just withdraw at will, well, that's probably not the most sound advice. The person's telling you wait longer might have been a little bit more conservative in their estimates. And so I would tend to be more conservative. I'd rather know that, because the worst thing you want to do is retire and then 2 years later, you wake up and I got to go back and work at Walmart or McDonald's or something just to make ends meet. So wouldn't you rather know for sure? The good news is you're looking for this information 5 years out. So it might be a great candidate for our report card, by the way, because we would actually show you the numbers in great detail.
Well, see, that report card, the question you just asked, okay, healthcare, how are those costs going to be covered? What about taxes? Have you looked at what your tax burden is going to be in retirement? And if you haven't, just piling up the money is not enough. That's why we have this comprehensive, smart process. Well, David, actually, the next question is about health insurance. Question is, I turned 65 this year and plan to continue working until age 70. Should I sign up for Medicare now? I have insurance through my job and I'm satisfied with it. So should I continue with that plan until I retire?
Okay, so here's the thing. If you're married or single, makes a very big difference in this decision. So if you're about 85% of all workers in America get their health care from their employer. Here's the thing. If you're married and your spouse or family is also on that plan, this decision would affect them as well. So if they're younger than you and not eligible to go on Medicare, then you may need to stay on the plan. However, what you want to do is you want to find out what is the premium you're paying out of your paycheck, right? So most employers, we included, will make the employer pay a small piece. I believe we currently pay a little over 80% of the freight for our employees. We used to be 100%, but as we grew, it just wasn't sustainable. But most employers, it's somewhere closer to 50%, but larger employers, you get a better deal. So you're probably paying 20 to 30 to 40% of what it really costs through your payroll deduction. They're paying on the other half. But what is that premium? And then what is your out-of-pocket exposure? How much do you have to pay when you go to the doctor, when you go to the hospital? How much could you pay in a bad year where you have an out-of-pocket maximum, et cetera? It might be $7,500, $10,000 on your plan. If you roll on to Medicare at 65, you can typically, if your income is within the limits, we just talked about IRMAA, so that's going to cost you $180 to access Medicare Part B. A is already covered. You paid taxes your whole life for that. But then you're going to buy, most likely you would want to consider buying what's called a supplemental policy. That is about $120 a month at 65 here in the state of Nebraska. It's more in other states. But so about $300 a month all in. And you really have no out of pocket though, Chip. So that's where the math starts to really make sense. Well, if I'm paying $280 a month through my paycheck, but for $310 a month I can go on Medicare, but have no out of pocket versus have $6,000 potential out of pocket, that may be a smart move. We can run that analysis. It is the M in this report card where we evaluate your healthcare and can give you a definitive answer, but you do want to know before you make that decision. By the way, if your company's large enough, their HR department may be coming to talk to you about rolling on a Medicare because it's benefiting them
well,
if you choose to do so.
I wondered if you would say, from the viewpoint of the employer, I'd kind of like to move you over to Medicare.
All day, every day. As fast as I can get you off of my plan, I'm going to tell you, hey, that's a good decision for all of us.
Well, then I better be alert because in a few years, since you're fixated with my age, I'm not quite there, but in a few years, that'll be me. I'm 65, but I'm planning to work to 70.
We have a couple other employees older than you, so we want to make sure the audience knows you are not the oldest nor the second oldest. So we have a few older folks.
I'm not sure about that, but you also mentioned that if the spouse is younger, the spouse, it's not a package deal. Medicare is only for the individual.
Correct. So that's where someone may need to stay until their spouse hits that age 65 if they're getting health care through the employer. Or they could look to go on the marketplace. My wife's a couple years younger than I am.
Yep. So, okay. All right.
There's a lot of things again, there's so much you don't know. This
know
stuff
what
is
you don't
complicated.
know.
That's why a real holistic plan covers all these areas.
All right, let's squeeze in a quickie here on life insurance, David. What is a 770 account and how do I get one?
Okay, so that sounds like somebody's marketing gimmick. So I sometimes refer to life insurance as a 7702 account. And just so you understand, that's the IRS code.
Okay.
IRS code 7702 is a code that allows one to accumulate cash value inside a life insurance policy and potentially access it 100% tax-free. So I personally use this strategy. It's not for everyone, but there are specially designed life insurance policies that can be used to accumulate wealth or accumulate cash in a tax-deferred growth vehicle and potentially access that cash in your lifetime 100% tax-free. Now, there's quite a bit to this. It's not for everybody, but it is a very, very tax-advantaged way to pile dollars in. And the advantage of an account like this, Chip, is there's no limits. You can buy as much life insurance as you want, typically up to 35 times your net worth. So you can buy quite a bit. So in other words, you could pile a lot of cash value into such a policy. However, there are fees and expenses and charges that would
Okay,
apply.
because there was a cautionary tone in your voice when you first started talking about
Look,
this.
it's fantastic, but you got to understand the insurance company has a lot of, there is life insurance involved. So what you're doing is you're typically, when you're doing this for cash value, you're trying to buy the least amount of life insurance legally possible. So just so you understand, prior to 1983, you could put unlimited funds into life insurance policy. In fact, Major League Baseball used to do the signing bonuses through a whole life contract. They buy $1 of insurance, put $1 million basically in the policy. Now there's $1 million and $1 in that policy that you, the player, could actually borrow out tax-free. And basically, when you took the cash out, the death benefit just went down. So and Congress was like, wait a minute, this isn't what we intended. So Congress basically, through the two tax acts that Tanfer went through in 81 and 83, through Reagan, changed the way life insurance is regulated. So now we have what's called MEC limits, modified endowment contract. So you have to buy at least a reasonable amount of life insurance with it. But you can still take advantage of this. And due to the Secure Act and the CARES Act, you can actually fully fund these policies in 4 years and 1 day, which is really unique. So typically, if you're a high income earner that has discretionary income, this can be a very advantageous way to start accumulating some dollars for the future, potentially having tax-free income. And it is a strategy that we utilize, but it's not one for everybody.
Up next, the housing market continues to show troubling signs. We'll tell you about it next on Retire Smart with David Brooks. Welcome back to Retire Smart with David Brooks. I'm Chip Maxwell. David, I do want to get to those housing market issues, but you sent the team a couple items I want to make sure we cover. One is it's another CNBC headline: more office space is being removed than added for the first time in at least 25 years. That sounds seismic.
Well, it's astonishing, really, but the reality is people moved out to the suburbs, people moved and went remote. Now people are bringing people back to the office, but they're not necessarily bringing them back to the big old fogey stogie office buildings, right? And so we're seeing these pop-up workstations where people are working in collaborative workstations. People are, because of what employees kind of demanded from this, a lot of companies are now building small regional offices or just taking over smaller old banks. And we had a ton of banks closing the brick and mortar doors. They're not closing the bank, but they're shutting down branches, right? They're just not profitable to run these branches. And those have been converted into smaller office space. So the big offices are no longer really being built. I mean, right here in Omaha, Merkel Insurance, who now has got their offices on the 2 floors right above our building, our heads right now here in our building. They had the 2 towers downtown that are now literally being converted into housing. And so it makes a lot of sense. It's for urban development and economic activity to have condos and apartments built in downtown is a fantastic idea. Now, the counter trend of that, we have a large building, a large insurance carrier here building the tallest building in Omaha as we speak. And that got a lot of our tax incentive financing here tied to a certain mass transit system that we won't mention because I don't want to get my blood boiling here. But basically, right, why are they building that when from what all reports we hear, they have less than 14% of their people that were going to the office to begin with. So really, really curious on that. But anyway, this is a trend that we probably see continuing, and it doesn't bode well for banks that are holding loans on all these buildings, Chip. That's the real problem here. We've talked many times over the last 15 months, buildings selling for pennies on the dollar, right? The hotel in downtown San Francisco, 5-star hotel I stayed in just 5 years ago. They just mailed the keys back to the bank, and that was a Hilton property. We've seen building after building in major towns, Baltimore, St. Louis, we've shown them right here on this show, that are selling for 15, 20 cents on the dollar. That is continuing, and that does not bode well for banks.
Fire sale prices and just walk away from it.
So who's losing here? The bank that made that loan, right? Because they're having to forgive a ton of money, and that is a problem. We have about $600 billion in unrealized losses on the balance sheets of the top 200 banks in the U.S. as we sit here today.
David, you sent me this headline, and I was intrigued as much by your comment as the headline. So the headline from CNBC is, investors are piling into big, short treasury bets alongside Warren Buffett. And your comment was, journalism at its worst. Were you knocking CNBC or what?
Yeah, I am, absolutely.
What's wrong here? Well, first of all, what's going on, and what do you think is wrong with the analysis?
Because they're telling you that they're shorting U.S. Treasuries.
Yeah,
that's not the case. They're buying U.S. Treasuries, short duration.
Okay.
Warren Buffett, one of his great quotes, never been against America. He's the biggest holder of U.S. Treasuries. He's not shorting the bond market. He's buying U.S. Treasuries.
Okay,
so
define what it means then to short a Treasury
You would be
bond.
selling them. You would be betting on them crashing in value. Now, what they are doing is they're going shorter in duration, the longer duration, right? So duration is how long to maturity. So you can buy 1-year bonds, 5-year bonds, 10-year bonds, 20 or 30-year, right? So 30 years is a long-term bond. Now, when yields go up, as they have in the last 30 days, the longer the duration, the more that bond will go down in value in the short term, only if you sell, right? So if you hold to maturity, you can't lose any money.
Is that inverted bond curve you've talked
yields
about
go up,
before?
bond prices go down, and vice
versa. Because the long
versa.
term should be more valuable, but sometimes the short term is.
If interest rates go down in the future, they will be worth.
Yeah.
But what Warren Buffett is doing is they're taking their free cash flow and they're buying U.S. Treasuries. The headline is trying to sensationalize like he's shorting the government, and that's nonsense. Warren Buffett has been quoted many times, never bet against the U.S., right? So anyway, I just thought it was disingenuous the way they framed that headline.
Boy, that is shocking for CNBC to get that turned around. All right, so let's get into the housing market items. You sent these around to the team, David. The first one is a chart about, we've been looking at Florida a lot lately. This is the Dallas housing market, and you're saying this housing market is about to get cheaper.
Well, look at the listings. Over the last 4 months, the amount of listings has accelerated exponentially, and there are neighborhoods where there are 15% of the homes vacant, according to Melanie Wright, who's a real estate reporter that I follow. She's put out a lot of great content over the last 15 years following real estate through the Great Depression. And we have these, and you got to remember, all the listings that have popped up, we showed the recent listings in Florida being more than the 10 largest states in New England, right? Combined.
Yeah.
We're seeing this pop up in Phoenix. We're seeing this now in the Dallas market. And so people, if they're wanting to sell their house, are going to have to come off their price significantly, which I find it ironic. I literally got my postcard in the mail yesterday, Chip. My valuation on my home went up 9% this year.
I got that love note too. Mine
9%.
went up significantly.
So that means they're going to increase my taxes 9% when the value of my home didn't go up. It actually went down and is going to go down over the next 12 months. So I would highly encourage every one of you that has the time to contest your property valuation statement you just got, Douglas or Sarpy County, Lancaster, doesn't matter. Go in there and fight because it's not realistic. How do we give these people an unconstitutional way to just keep raising your taxes arbitrarily by 9 or 10% when your value is actually going the other way? Anyway, that gets a whole nother rant.
Just anecdotally in conversations with people, my niece just bought a house for the first time, and one of my children is a homeowner. Others are kind of looking. They're young people trying to find a place that's
it's difficult for young people to afford houses,
it is,
for sure.
And that's my question. Is Omaha, Omaha, you've mentioned this before, Omaha tends to avoid the extremes, high or low.
Yeah, we're very well positioned to weather a recession, yes.
Okay, so it seems like the housing market here locally is still pretty strong.
Yeah, so I would tell you.
For the seller, I mean.
Yeah, so the mean price of a house here, you're probably safe. Even if we go through a deep recession, you might go down 3 to 5%. And if you're buying your house for shelter and to stay in it 5 to 7 years or longer, don't worry about it. Now, if you're trying to buy it to flip it, which people get excited, or, we're going to buy this and fix it up and sell it next month, I would be really cautious in that regard. I own my home here. I own rental properties here, right? I own them in other states. We talk about that. And I have sold properties in the last year or so, seeing what's coming. And that's just because I have the ability to do it in a unique way. And I typically rarely will have to ever pay tax on any of those sales, et cetera. So just caution. But if you're a young person trying to buy a house for the first time, don't overspend, right? And buy the house. My advice to people is always, when they're buying their first home, buy it envisioning that you're going to live there 5 to 7 years and then turn it into your first rental property. In other words, you're going to save up your down payment for your next house. Don't buy it as your forever home or the home you think you're going to permanently raise your family in. Buy it as an investment. Get your mindset right, because it's a great long-term investment as long as you're willing to be long-term. Problem is, job movers today, people job around, they switch jobs much more frequently than our generation did, and they may not be able to stay in that house. In that regard, you may be better off renting. If you know you're going to go in a career field and you're going to move to a city like Dallas and maybe try to get promoted out of there in 3 years or less, I would not purchase a home. I'd highly recommend you just rent and invest your extra capital.
David, you mentioned some places in the country, Florida and Texas and other places, the housing inventory is growing exponentially, was your term. Well, maybe that's reflected in this headline. This is the Daily Mail out of the United Kingdom. Realtors panic as buyers pull out of deals at near record levels. market is crashing before our eyes.
Yeah, so we're having typically 15 to 20% of closings that are supposed to happen each month are no longer happening here throughout the U.S. So people are getting buyer's remorse before they close, right? They're getting a little nervous because, if we back away, even if they lose a couple $1,000 deposit, they may be able to buy that house 30, 40, or 50,000 cheaper. Here in Omaha, like we talked about, if you're buying down in the, say, 200 to 400,000 range, you're not going to have massive changes. But everything above $500,000 here, we're seeing you have to come off the price 8, 10, 15%. We just had one. I walk my dog every morning through my neighborhood. I live in a neighborhood where the houses are typically 500 to $1 million or so. And I just saw one that went down 15% to get the deal closed from what they listed at about 4 months ago. The other thing we're seeing is listings that go stale is really skyrocketing. That's over 60 days, according to realtors. They call that a stale listing. If it doesn't sell in the first 60 days, it gets stale, and so you have to do a price drop to get attention back on your property or something, and so that's a concern. Again, if you have to sell, you may want to get out in front of that and just drop your price now to get a deal done. If you don't have to sell, you may want to pull it from the market.
With the hope that, a year from now?
Yeah, if you can sit and keep the house for 2.5 years or longer, you might want to hold on to it because the prices will be fine, but we're going to go through a little bit of typically the housing, when we roll through these cycles, it's about an 18-month cycle to get through the price, the valley, and get back to where we started from. So we'll measure that in future shows and future years, but if we started January of this year and we were to look at January next year and the year after that, you're probably not going to see a lot of change in the actual price of what the house is worth.
Well, that was the Daily Mail in the UK reporting on the U.S. housing market. We'll keep an eye on all of this for you, but that will do it for this week, folks. Please visit our website, retiresmartnow.com, and click Attend an Event at the top of the page to see everything we currently offer, including that IRMAA class. No charge, no obligation for our events, but you must register. You can do it online or by calling 402-369-7777. David, bring us home.
Have a blessed and prosperous week. Enjoy the summer weather.
Thank you for listening to Retire Smart with David Brooks. I'm Chip Maxwell. For David Brooks and the entire team at Retire Smart, have a great week.